In my opinion, the Mandamanos of 23rd July 2024 were by far the most successful, the most impactful for those opposing the dictatorial regime of William Ruto, more than any other. I mean, historically, no other Mandamanos have been as effective, which is strange, very strange, because this came hot in the heels of a threat from the executive. GenZs and their supporters were told in no uncertain terms, enough is enough. These Mandamanos will come to an end. I promise you. That is what the executive told them. And considering all the tragedy, all the things that have happened to protesters in the past, as terrible as they were, after this chilling speech by Ruto, the truth is, some Kenyans feared that protesters would be cowed. They would not show up on the streets. Nothing would happen. And Ruto would end up being right. But instead, they had their biggest success. But what do I mean? Using one of the very oldest strategies or tactics used by armies since the beginning of time, a few very frightening things emerged, frightening for the Ruto regime, that clearly confirm for those who doubted which side has an upper hand in this duel. And by the way, this strategy, this tactic, I personally believe saved many precious Kenyan lives. But I'll come back to that a little later. That very controversial, sensitive issue that I want to present. You know, there are times when you can overcome your opponent by sheer brute force. Okay? And there are other times where your brute force is neutralized by the smartness of your opponent. Now, what happened on Tuesday very clearly showed us that despite the brute force of the Kenyan government, the brute force of the Ruto regime, it is very unlikely that they will prevail against the smartness of the GenZs. That became crystal clear. And it is a point that many analysts have been arguing about. Many have been saying, do you know what state machinery is? Do you know it is impossible to defeat state machinery? Wengi wamejaribu and they have failed. It will not work. Well, yesterday, Tuesday, was a clear illustration that in this particular case, it will not be like that. And I know that some of us must have seen the clip on social media where Gen Z is imitating the president and saying, corruption will end. I promise you, corruption will end in Kenya. With what has unfolded in Kenya so far, and with what we saw on Tuesday, that is now becoming more and more believable. Because corruption and bad governance in Kenya has its roots very deep. And this is a mugumo tree. Yeah, almost impossible to uproot. But now, it is becoming more and more believable that indeed these evils will be uprooted, and indeed we will have a brand new Kenya. Yeah, and very soon at that. Change shall come to Kenya, but it shall not come when you expect it, and it shall not come how you expect it. Yeah, referring to Kenyans. In the build-up to the Tuesday Mandamanos, it was all about Occupy JKIA, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. And the government responded, in preparation. Security forces, boots on the ground, aerial coverage, monitoring of access roads, etc., etc. Hey, the resources that were involved, the time that was involved, the personnel that were assigned to this task of protecting JKIA, you all saw it. Massive. In the end, the GenZs did not make any serious effort to approach the airport. And in fact, they left it so late that many observers gave up, assumed that it was going to be a very quiet Tuesday. They left it very late. But in the end, their main focus was the CBD. And this time round, things on the ground were very different. Because, obviously, all the resources were heavily concentrated at the airport to protect the airport from protesters. And what unfolded were peaceful protests. No tear gas, no violence, and very important, irrefutable proof for the whole world to see that the Kenyan Gen Z protesters are peaceful, they don't loot, they don't break the law, and so all these chaos we usually see, running battles, looting, etc., etc., usually comes from elsewhere. And indeed on Tuesday at the CBD, where all this chaos usually comes from, was exposed very clearly for the entire world to see. Okay? Goons hired by the government, goons hired by the regime were exposed. Caught on camera receiving money, caught on camera being fueled, having their motorbikes being fueled. It was all there so clearly for everybody to see. And if there was any doubt, KTN, a local TV station, did a beautiful expose to clarify everything for those who may still be in doubt. Now, what is the impact of this on the government? What is the impact of this on the struggling Ruto regime? The most devastating damage this has done to the Ruto regime is that now they have lost all credibility. Whatever little credibility they still have is now poof, gone. And I believe we all know this thing called credibility. Once you've lost it, it's gone and gone kabisa. And getting it back is impossible. And so, from here going forward, you can be sure it's going to be downhill for the Ruto regime and his bid to hang on, cling on to power, in his bid to rule people who have shown us very clearly they don't want to be ruled by him. or anybody else in his setup or regime. Now, as earlier promised, this diversionary tactic of sending all the focus to the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, which was obviously pure genius, saved a lot of lives. Because you'll have noted that unlike previous demonstrations and protests in Kenya, in the CBD, there was no loss of life. Okay? And those who were stationed there as first responders, first aid, medical personnel, had a very quiet day. Very quiet. It has never happened like this before. You see, in the past, some of the casualties have been as a result of brutal policemen, armed, high up in buildings somewhere. But you need to know, even snipers wanahitaji muda mrefu sana kujitayarisha. I can assure you, it is not the way you see in movies. It is not that easy. There are so many factors, even mathematical calculations that need to be done. So much so that one cannot avoid advanced preparations that may even need to start the day before. I have a funny feeling that refuses to leave me, that those who planned this day, those who strategized, had at the top of their mind saving lives, and they succeeded 100%. Using the oldest trick in the book, the most common, the simplest, diversionary tactics. And it all worked like a charm, and ended up achieving many other objectives for the GenZs. And going forward for the government, things are going to be even more difficult and complicated. Because for starters, you can now not be sure where exactly these protests are going to unfold. You can't be sure. Also, you can never underestimate the smartness of your opponent. I'm not talking like the government. You can never underestimate under any circumstances the smartness of your opponent, the Gen Z. And you see, the government has one huge disadvantage. Many of those people in our security forces, many of those decision makers are old school, and they know nothing else but the same old tactics they have used successfully in the past. But now, they have a very different kind of animal to deal with. And so far, it is very clear that they're struggling. They don't seem to have a clue. Okay? And so, even with massive resources, massive brute force, it should now be clear that this battle for the very soul of the country called Kenya increasingly favors the other side, the side that does not have state machinery behind them, the side that does not have massive government resources behind them. Thanks so much for your continued support as we come towards the end of this season of gifting to Kumekucha Chris. You can see details on the screens right now, repeated in the description area below, and also in the comments area. All for a better Kenya. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.